So our goal for this video is to add the database aspect to our API. We want to store our items into a storage that even if the application stops running, it will store. So we had a list which was keeping our to-do items, but now we want to store into a database. So this is where we use what we call an object relational mapper, which is Entity Framework. And what it does is it is going to give us the window to talk to the database. So we don't have to know what SQL is. We just need to understand how C# collections like list work, and we'll talk to that database. So the first thing that you need is to bring in the packages that will enable you to use the Entity Framework. So we're going to go to Dependencies, right click that, then we're going to go to Manage Nuget Packages. There we're going to go to Browse, and we're going to search for Entity Framework. Entity Framework core. Then we're going to install the core itself. Make sure it's version number 8 since we're using ASP.NET Core 8. So we need the Entity Framework itself. Then we are going to proceed to design Entity Framework core with the design extension. Then we need to tell Entity Framework what type of provider, or rather what type of database it's going to use. In our case, we're going to use SQL Server. We will install that as well. Accept that. Then we'll do what we call migration. So migration is just creating a database from your models in your application, and we'll see that. And we'll use tools which will enable us to run those migrations and create our database. So once tools are added, we will proceed. So for you to talk to a database using Entity Framework, there's a concept of a context. A context is a window through which you're going to access your database. So I'll create a folder. I'll call that folder data. And within that, I will create that context. So a context is just a C# class. And the context is given a name that is going to make sense with your application. So for instance, we're building a to-do. So I'd call this a to-do context. And others even add the word DB so that it's more clear. So a context is just a class. But what makes it unique is that that class is going to inherit from the DB context of Entity Framework, which is the window to go and talk to our database. So we'll say this is going to inherit from DB context. So DB context will give us what we need to talk to our database. And in OOP, when you extend this, it means the to-do context has all the capabilities that a DB context has. Some, for instance, if you go to the DB context, it has a lot of stuff that it does, initializing a lot. So all of these goodies are now behind by the DB context. So according to the Entity Framework, they say before you do anything, you need to bring in the constructor. So CTOR is the constructor. Now the constructor is going to take in what we call a DB context menu context options. And the context options will take the name of your DB context to do list, and we'll give it a name. We'll call it options. So options is common, but it can be everything you want. Now the DB context class, for it to run, it will also need to have the options. So the options that will be given to the context will be pushed to, so base here just means the parent class, which is DB context. So that the DB context will use that option which we give it so that it runs that regression. Now the other next thing you want to do is this thing wants to know, when I'm creating the database, what are the tables I should have? Because we had a folder called models, and the model has our to-do item. But we want it to know which it needs, because we can have other models that we don't want to be part of our database or a table in our database. So here we tell it that we want to use a data set of a to-do item. So we'll bring that in. So what we're saying is, as you're creating the database, create also a table called to-do items. And there you're done. So that's your context. If we had more tables, and we'll do that as we go in this course, we're going to bring them here. And if there's need to also link these two, we can go as far as also add more into the context. But this should suffice for now. The question would be, where does the database reside? So our application needs to know where the database is going to reside. That's where we need a connection string that connects our application to where the database is going to exist. So we're going to go to our app settings. Why are we using our app settings? This is a place where we put our configurations that when we change, we do not need to run the application again, which means if the app has been hosted, then if it's hosted, then we can say, let's deploy it, and we can change the connection string. So there's what we call connection strings, and it takes a connection string, and I'll call this a to-do connection. To-do connection. So what do we have in our connection string? We're saying it has to exist on a server somewhere. And when you see localDB MSQ localDB, this is just saying Visual Studio comes with its own SQL Server Express. So you don't have to install SQL Server standalone on your application for testing, although you need to have that. But for purpose of development, you can just say, I will use the local within Visual Studio. So this one will point to Visual Studio. This database here is the name of your database. And we can just call it, I'll call it to-do DB, meaning that it will be the name. Trusted connection is equal to true. It means that as long as I log on my machine here, I don't have to give it a password and a username. Multiple active set is just allowing multiple concurrent running to that. So all we're saying is this database will be at this location and it will be this name. So our application will now know where it can find that particular database. The next thing is to go to our DI container. So what happens in our container? You might ask. We want to use our database access or our context all through our application. The most logical way would be for you to just create an instance of it in every class you use, in every instance. But what you want to do here is to use the container, the DI container, which here you add services. So what will happen is we only register the context once. And wherever we want to use it, we'll just inject it into our constructor, and we'll do that in a minute. So we want to add entity framework. So we'll say builder, which is what we create. We'll say builder.services. I want you to add me a DB context. So add DB context. Now the DB context takes in the context you want to give it, because it's possible to have multiple contexts. In our application, we have the to-do context. So I'll give it the to-do. I'll give it the to-do context. Then, if you remember, in our to-do context, we need to give it options. These options will be passed to the base, which is the DB context, for it to run that migration. So I'm going to say options. Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to say options goes to, then I'll say options dot. Here I'll tell it what to use. I'll tell it to use SQL Server. Then within the SQL Server, it needs to know where connection string is. So we can give the connection string here, but because we've put it in our app settings where we can change it, all we have to do is say builder.configurations.get connection string. And what we'll do there is just give it the name of the connection string. Okay, and we'll close it. And our name of a connection string was to do connection, and I'll give it there, like so. Now you wonder why there is that error. Expected. So builder.connection, opening that, we've opened this one here, we've opened two, we open a third one. Okay, so we're saying for the options, this is what we'll give it, and if you want to get whatever should be there, go here and you'll get it. Meaning to say, if I change this, it also change here, but you don't have to build or redeploy your application. So we have that. So it means our application knows that it depends on the to-do context, and whenever we want to use it, and we'll do it in a minute, we are going to just inject it. So we had our controllers, and in our controller all we had was a list. Now we're saying we want to use the database. It means we have to bring an instance of the to-do context, but since we've already added it to the DB, to the dependency injection container, all we do is just inject it into our constructor. So we're going to bring in a constructor of the CTOR of the class itself. Then we're going to say that we are going to rely on the to-do context, and we'll call this to-do context, and we'll create for it a field for it, which is to-do context, but I prefer to put an underscore there so that I can clearly see it from my eyes. It's also common practice. You see, so all I have to do here is just inject the context into our controller. I do not have to give it again where it exists, where is it? I don't have to do this over again to say this context relies on this. I've already added it. I've already added it there. So all I will continue to do is just use it. So we'll get to return here. Now, for you to have access to the context, so just to show you that we're not using the memory, I'm going to comment it out. Now, for us to use our database, we will use the context. And the context is very simple. So for you to get all items, I'll say var items is equal to give me the context. And in the context, there are database sets. Dot. The set here could be, okay. For some reason, it's not picking. We do have our context. Okay. I know why that's the case. So what we'll do here is, first of all, we need to run a migration to create this database so that it knows. So I had jumped a step there. So we have added our context. We have gone to add the connection string in our settings, and we have added it into our dependency injection. Now let's create the actual database first. So I'll go to Tools, Nuget Package Manager console, then I'll say Add Migration. So Add Migration is a keyword in .NET. I'll say initial migration. So this will tell you we are about to create a database, and this is what it will look like. Then if you're convinced with how it looks like, you are going to proceed, create the database. So the migration won't create a database, but something interesting will come here. It's going to create a migrations folder. Then it will tell you that we want to create a table called to do items. Within that item, we have the ID, the title, description, and its complete. The primary key will be there to do items. So it went to our models and it saw the word ID. And what Enter did was it has inferred that the ID will be the primary key, which was our design, of course. So Enter is smart enough to know that, okay, this could be the ID. But we'll see in the next videos that we can fine tune this and tell it what we want it to do. But in this case, it fits for our purpose. So the title, the description, this is a Boolean. You'll see that it has also done the same here. And all we have to do is to say update database, and this will create a database. So the database will exist somewhere. Now I'm seeing an error saying only the variant cache is supported. How you can get around that is just to double click on your project and just set this to false. Then we can try to update the database again, and it will go and create the database. Now you see that we have done there. These are just SQL Server queries. You see that this is, that SQL queries. This is create table, and our table is created. So now I think we can go back to our controller and say, okay, we want to bring in the database context. Then I'll uncomment the in memory because we no longer need it. Then we'll say get us the to do context, and there we want you to give us the to do items table and return that to list. So make it a list. So you see we have the context and the name of the table, and this will give us everything, but we want it to be a list so that we can handle better in C#. And all we'll do here is return the items. So there we're using our database. Then for the get, we will convert that, and we'll say instead of using the list we had, we are going to use the go to the table and get us whatever is first or default against our ID. We'll do the same for this. We'll do the same for this. And we'll do the same for first or default. So all we have done here is just change the source of the data. But you see, you don't have to know what SQL Server is. I mean, you don't know what SQL is. Just by adding your context, you can just use an ordinary list. So just a quick recap on our endpoints. To get all, we've said, get us the context, get us the to-do items. This will give you a list of all the things, but they won't be in a C# list. So you're just pushing it to a list. When it comes to getting a single item, you're saying, get me the context, get me the table, and first or default, whatever equals the ID. And we know that the ID is a primary key. So we're going to get the specific to-do item if it exists. For us to create, we're going to say, get us the context on the to-do table, just add whatever item we are given there. When we go to edit, we'll say, whatever we are given here, go ahead and update it. So first of all, we'll see if the IDs are similar, then we'll see if it exists. If it doesn't exist, we'll say we cannot edit what we don't have. If it comes back, then we'll go and change these guys. Same thing with delete. Delete, we'll search, then we'll remove. Now let's run this and then see. So I'm going to click run. And as that is about to run, I'm going to go to view and I'll go to SQL Server Object Explorer because that's where our database within the Visual Studio is there. So here it is, the Object Explorer. I'll drop down the SQL Server, then I'll drop down that, then I'll go to database, and you'll see that we have that. So okay, fine, let this run. So as this is running, you'll see that we have the to-do database, and within the to-do database there should be a table, and you'll see that we have that to-do items table and another table called migration. So the migration history will just track your migration so that any migration it's able to tell. And if we go to the to-do item table and say view data, and you'll see that it is now empty. And if we go to our Swagger and to test it, if I say get me all the tasks, we expect it to be empty to give us back an empty list. So we'll try to create a task. So I'll leave the ID 0 for now because if you change that, it will throw an error because the ID is auto increment, so it will increment on its own. So we'll change how we do that in other videos so that we remove that and use what we call DTOs. But for now, let's just leave it as it is. So I'll call this gym. I'll call this leg there, and we'll say it's false. We have not yet done that. I'll add the first one, and there it returns me the first one, and it returns where the task is. Then we can add shopping, and this could be groceries, and you can execute that. So when you add that, we have 2 tasks added into our database, and if I am to come back and execute, something interesting happens. You will see that there is an empty list. So something is wrong, that error is. So with Entity Framework, whenever you add something, if you just leave it like this, let's look at the post. If you just leave it like this, nothing will happen. You have to explicitly tell it that get me the to-do item, and there's something we run, it's called save changes. So the save changes would be the one that is going to save changes, so not saved, save changes. The save changes would be the one that is going to effect that change. So that's why we're not able to get that. So this would be important where you are creating and also where you are updating, because you will change. So you also want to save those changes. So let us run it one more time and see. And there we have it again. I'll go to the post and I'll try to create it again. I'll call this gym. I'll call this leg day. And we haven't gone to the gym yet. So let's execute. And now you will see that it comes back and there's one there. There was 0 if you notice. So leg day is done. We'll go shopping. And we can say groceries. And we could execute that. And groceries is there. If I try to get all tasks, try it out and get my task, and there'll be 2 there. The other thing I could do is try to get by ID. I'll try to get just the second one. And if I try it out, you will see that we get the second one. Then I can say I want to update the second one and change it. What did you get? So it was shopping. So I'll put shopping there. I'll still maintain a 2 there. Again, we'll change that with details as we proceed. It was shopping. We had groceries. But we want to say now that it's true that we have actually gone and done that task. So we get a 204. And if I pull number 2 again, you'll see that it's now true. And I can proceed and delete number 1 so that we have 1 remaining. And I'll say delete number 1. Something will happen. Then we are going to say, let's execute that. And you notice that nothing is gone. Why hasn't it gone? Because we have not effected the change. So it means we also need to, once we remove, we have to save those changes. And once you've done save those changes, then you should be able to now delete. So congratulations, we've reached this far. We have been able to bring in Entity Framework into our API. We have removed the in-memory database. Now we can store it persistently. If you've been with me this far, I say thank you. And I hope that this has given you some knowledge. This has opened up some doors for you. And if you are interested in supporting the channel so that we continue giving you good free content, please subscribe, like, but most importantly, support us with something that you can afford on our Patreon channel. We will be very glad and we would share a lot of